Hi everyone, this is Neeta from Edooism. I have with me today a very special guest, Dr. Oguntala, and she's from California. I would like her to introduce herself.
Hi, Nita. Hi. I am Dr. Oguntala. I'm a medical doctor who is specializing in adolescent medicine, so teen medicine. I tend to take a very biopsychosocial approach to teens. So I'm really seeing the integration of the medical stuff, the psychology stuff, the social stuff. And when you look at all those things, you can essentially really build the teen from the inside out. So my private practice is really about not just building the teen from the inside out, but enriching the relationship and the emotional connection they have between their parents and themselves. You know?
That's wonderful. So the reason for this interview today is that a lot of teenagers feel isolated and neglected by their peers, at schools, even by authority sometimes. And the reason they feel that way is because they may have a certain learning difficulty, or they may feel different from the rest in a certain way. So when these pain points happen for parents and for children, what would your advice be to parents on how to support and empower their child to get out there and face the world?
Yeah, so it's this is a really common issue that comes up, and it's because this issue is what essentially leads to a lot of the anxiety and depression and the school difficulties, right? It'll worsen the school difficulties. So this is a lot of what actually presents to me in terms of parents asking for help. And so what I find is that the first place to start is with the assumptions we make as parents when we're having our kids, right? So we get this shiny new kid, and what we tend to do is we have all these ideas of who this kid could be and what they're going to do and what's going to be fun for them. And, maybe they'll like this the way we like this, or maybe they'll be good at this the way we're good at this, right? So that's the first step, right? That's the first issue that happens.
Right.
So because we have so many expectations, our extended families may have so many expectations that we're actually at that point not letting the kid tell us who they are. We are telling them who we want them to be, right? And so there goes the first level of a blow to their sense of self, because they learn immediately that there are things about them that do not work well with their parents. It's like, oh, they want me more quiet, or, oh, they wanted me to sleep more, or, oh, they wanted me to eat a certain way. And so what ends up happening is there goes the slow development of this concept we call shame, where they feel not good enough, worthless, that they don't matter, right? But I would say that that's the first level of it, right? That you'd have to first reckon with anything from I thought I was going to have, right? I wanted to have, I was hoping my kid would be, to really understanding this is the kid I've been given. So this is the kid that I need, right? And I would say that every child, right? I have a thing that, parents that work with me know that I call the problem child, right? The one that they're actually calling me about, right? I call that kid the family's Yoda, right? So for
Yoda.
Yeah. So for people who are not familiar with Star Wars, Yoda is like the wise, old guru. And so very much filled with wisdom. And I would say that the kid who seems to be causing the most difficulty, that is your Yoda. That's the kid who is noticing and cannot sit with the discomfort of what's happening in the household. And so the reason I call them the Yoda is because it is through that child's difficulty dealing with what's happening in the home that the whole family usually has to try and change.
Right. Yeah. A sleeping pattern that only happens when they're teenagers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Am I right? That does really happen? Is it physiological?
it is physiological that they tend to have later sleep times, which is why it'd be hard to get your 15-year-old to go to bed at 8:30 unless they're sick,
Yeah.
right? So they actually go to bed later. They need more sleep, and that's why it becomes almost cruel that we have class started like early in the morning the next day. So
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so you can see how there are so many ways they're being told they're not okay, right? And that, but it feels so natural to sleep in, and they're being told that's not okay. You have to wake up and be groggy for this first class, right? So that already puts them in a difficult situation to understand, even though we understand the importance of sleep and learning. So these are things that I think for teens, they're sitting there going, wait, you're telling me that it's important that I sleep. I'm telling you I can't fall asleep until 10:30, 11 o'clock. You know I need an average of 9 to 9.5 hours to sleep, and yet you insisted on starting class when I would have only gotten 6 or 6.5 hours of sleep. So, again, it's as my daughter says, make it make sense. I don't understand it.
Night school is so good, or evening school for teens. Just for convenience sake for the education system, they have just clubbed everyone together from babies to seniors.
Yeah, and again, it's really a matter of who's in charge, whoever's in charge, and their willingness to listen to the research, right? It's that's stuff that really makes a big difference, because there's a reason everything is happening, but the reason is usually not for the benefit of the kids. So it's like parents have to be at work, so you have to start at this time so parents can get to work, and so it's just there are a bunch of other things at play, but not necessarily to the benefit of the child. So for a kid who's struggling with their own academic adeptness, that's going to be hard to know that they're not even on a schedule that works for them sleep wise. They're not on a schedule that works for them class wise, right? If you're going to start with a harder class in the beginning of the day, right, that would make more sense because they're more awake, and then you might want to put the more fun classes at the end of the day when they're not, right? So just some common sense things like that.
You'll see a lot more success stories, I think.
Yes.
Things will change. Okay, so I won't stretch this subject as much, but I will instead jump to the next topic of what is the right terminology that parents can use at home with their teenagers, or with their teenagers. What is the right terminology to use during an argument? Like, what if we play act and I tell you something like, you don't understand. Nobody talks to me in school. I'm alone. So what is it that time the parent can tell the child the next day? They don't want to go back to school.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I'm always telling parents is empathy first. It's really about empathy first, because I think that for parents, we're dealing with like, I have to pay the mortgage, I have to do these bills, and I have to do all these things. Those things, like, those feel like big issues. But going to school and not having a friend does not feel like a big issue necessarily to all parents, And so the first thing is empathy first, not saying you think you have problems, you're going to a better school than I ever could have gone to. None of that's going to work. Okay. So it really be about that empathy. So empathy first says it must be really hard to go to school and not know what your game plan is going to be like, what your day is going to be like, whether or not people are going to be looking at you, not talking to anybody, and then thinking up, why aren't people talking to you? What's wrong with you, right? And all of these things are the things that make them very self-conscious about not having somebody to talk to, right? Because really what they're doing is in that moment, they're saying, the other person who is willing to talk to me gives me my worth, right? If you talk to me, I have value. But if I sit here alone, because they identify, right? They equate that being alone with not being friendable, not being lovable, not being good enough. That association is what is causing them so much pain. If they don't make that association, then they just sit there and bring something to do, and they do it. And then when somebody sees them doing something that's interesting, they walk over and say, hey, you're into that too? I like that, and then it's not a problem. But it's like, if you believe, right, if your own core belief system is such that any kid sitting by themselves is a kid that nobody wants to be friends with, rather than a kid sitting by themselves is a kid we don't know well enough yet, right?
Right.
It's a very different way of doing that. And so when you can change those identifications, those equations for your own child, which we do, by the way, by how they hear us talk about things, right? So when we are walking on the street and there's a homeless person there and we're rushing them along, right? We are telling them that somebody who's different, somebody who is, not like us, should be ostracized, right?
Yeah.
Very different when they see us walk by somebody and we go, I guess we didn't really need these leftovers. Like, let's see if they want these leftovers, or we have extra change. Do you think you want to give them some money or something like that? Or, you know what? I have an extra bottle of water in my thing. You want to go over and hand over that, bottle of water? And so what they learn to do, what becomes normal, is walking over to somebody who nobody would talk to. All of a sudden there is empathy for the person who's alone. And so in having that empathy, you start to realize, I don't know the story of why you're sitting by yourself, right? So the curiosity becomes, I should go over and figure that out. If you have that kind of cultural norm in your household, well, then it won't bother you as much to sit by yourself. Right. You'll just know that, if a kid wants to know who I am, they'll come over, Yeah.
True. That's actually a very good point. I'm going to help a lot of people to think that way. It's a paradigm shift from thinking of, we do it all the time. I could tell somebody else this, but as a parent, I may forget to do that on a daily basis.
Yeah. They watch us more than we think. they definitely watch us more than we think. So when we're in class and when we're hanging out with them and we hear of a friend of ours, right? Because we're looking on social media and our friend's kid has graduated and gotten into XYZ school. And then we say, oh, they only got into this school, right? Or, oh, so-and-so's going to this school. Wow, they must be smart. I didn't think they were that smart, right?
Yeah.
All of those things are really the things that they're listening for that tell them, oh, that's why it's a big deal that my grades aren't this, right? That's how they know what things mean, because they see you feeling not okay, that your kid's going to the school, or that, whatever. They hear how you're gossiping. They hear how you're commenting. They hear the jealousy or the envy. All of those things are the things that really they use as a barometer for whether or not they're good enough, not what we tell them, And then what happens is when they have empathy, what it does is it calms the limbic system, the fear part of their brain that is saying, I don't have friends. It means I'm not good enough. It means I'm not lovable, right? All of a sudden that calms them enough so that you can actually start talking to them, in a different way. And so then you start asking them, like, well, in the previous year, did you ever see anybody sitting by themselves, right? Yeah. Did you ever walk over to them and ask them how they were doing,
Yeah.
And so then what ends up happening is, there's a good chance they maybe said no, and that they didn't walk over. And then what you want to ask them, why didn't you walk over, right? What made you not walk over? And that's when they'll say, well, I was scared. Like, I didn't know what the person was going to say. Like, I didn't know what to talk about and stuff like that, right? And so what you do is, well, let's build some of those skills then, so that we can help you feel more comfortable walking over to someone else, right? And so then what we can do is, why don't we do this? Why don't we start practicing some of these skills, so that what you can do is every day that you go to school, walk over to somebody who's sitting by themselves or just with one or two people, and walk over and introduce yourself, and then see how that feels, right? This becomes a different kind of exercise. You don't have to sit with them. You don't have to do anything like that. Let's just practice being the kind of friend we're looking for. Why don't we just practice that? And so this, in the process of this, they actually start to learn something about themselves that, I guess I can't just sit over and wait and expect people to come over to me. It's pretty hard to walk over to people. It's like, right?
So then they have empathy for those who don't walk over to them.
Correct.
That's lovely. Actually, that's such a powerful point. I want to put it up somewhere. So then there's one more thing I was thinking about is now, on the flip side, let's go to the parents of those children who are socially thriving, who are thriving with academics. That's the other side there. So what is the message for them?
Yeah.
The same
So
thing, empathy, but yes, they don't have time. Those children do not have time. It's not like they're mean or they're bad or they're purposely leaving somebody out, but they just don't have the time because they're so busy with the next thing. And same with adults. We don't have the time. We're not purposely excluding somebody, or we don't. So what do we say to those parents, and how do we, I didn't notice that your child is super social, super popular, super, good looking, good grades, everything is going well for them. They're getting into the best colleges or whatever you may feel about your child. So what do we say to them, and how do they build the empathy in their kids?
Yeah, so it's interesting because everybody has something that makes them feel not good enough. Everybody. And because of that, one of the ways that you can identify that is through conversation, right? So one of the things I used to ask my eldest, because they're just really good at math. And so I asked, have you ever thought of tutoring math, right? And they're like, no, because sometimes people, it's just hard to teach. And I said, what it might teach you, though, is humility, because you will realize that not everybody is good at a subject that you're good at. And it will allow you to have empathy for the entire classroom as you're being taught. Like, you'll realize that there may be people struggling, which would allow you more patience when somebody asks a question, or which allows you the confidence to say, hey, I think I can explain that better because I know how a kid thinks, and it doesn't sound like you do right now, And so it just offers a little more humility and a different kind of empathy, of understanding that we all have gifts. There's a reason we don't all have the same gifts, and it allows purposeful connection. Right?
Right. Yeah.
There's a reason we all have different stories. The themes are the same, but we have different stories about how those themes show up in us, right? So what we're trying to do is help the kids who feel ostracized because they don't think they're popular, they don't think they're doing well, right? Realize that just because you're looking at those kids and they're doing well in school doesn't mean that they're doing okay either, right? It doesn't mean that they're not struggling with, I'm really not smart, I just been lucky. It's like, I'm just waiting for the teacher to figure out that I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know why I keep getting these good grades, right? It's a different kind of expectation. And so what you start to realize by seeing the flip side is you go, wow, we're all having this issue. Maybe we should stop talking about grades altogether, and maybe we should just think about the learning. But in allowing them to see what is common in both, that is really how you allow a certain sense of connection that is not based on who's this, who's that, right? We have essentially valenced what is good and what is bad. We're really big on labeling. And so we said that it's better to be the most, but those kids are having their own challenge. And so when we understand that everybody is having some sort of challenge, then we just keep the challenge we have, right? And so then we can just work towards the important part about really letting the kids who are seemingly doing academically well, it doesn't mean that they're emotionally well. Those kids know how to perform to some degree. They have a lot of anxiety. They have a lot of perfectionism. That perfectionism manifests in different ways. So I don't ever see a difference. I often see the commonality. And so again, as parents, what we can do is educate on what's underneath the skill that you're seeing. And it's just like seeing your parents argue. The problem isn't that you see your parents argue, it's how they resolve the fight, right? How they resolve the discussion. So it's not that you're having trouble with an assignment or with a class. It's how you keep trying to learn how to do the assignment so that you can get it right, you know? And so it becomes really about there's courage to ask for an autopsy. I tend to call them autopsies. It's when you take whatever exam you've had, whatever homework you've had, see the ones that you got wrong and ask why you got it wrong, right? That's essentially an autopsy on what was done. You can learn so much on just being able to ask that question, right? So then you start to realize,
analogy.
Yes. So that becomes a way that I want people to do that with emotional interactions. I want them to do that with academic challenges. I want them to do that with relationships with friends, right? Something happens with a blow up and then you want to call back and you want to say, what happened? Like, why were you so upset yesterday? You know? And by doing that, you know, that's when somebody will reveal, well, I just found out my grandmother was sick that morning and I didn't know how to talk about it. And I guess I kind of took it out on you, right? There's the empathy, right? Oh my God, that makes so much sense. You know, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. And so that's why if you can get any of our children to be more curious about what has happened rather than make assumptions about what has happened. They're never going to think that the kid that's not doing well in class is not smart. They're going to be, there's something this kid's not figuring out about the way the class works, right? It's going to change how they're looking at people who are Austrians.
Right. I think this was a lot of good insight again. Thank you. I would like to air this video as soon as possible.